and I'm yeah, happy to do this. And so you might know that this is the very first ever live stream on this YouTube channel. Again, Language Culture and Dr. Lou. So welcome very much to the first ever live stream on the channel. And I would really like to yeah, talk about a few surprising facts about languages today. And fantastic. Sorry, I'm not using software that would allow me to pull the chat messages up on the screen. Um, and Sunshine says that's weird. On my TV, there is no video, but I can see you there. They're not two different videos or something, are they? I don't think they should be anyway. I don't know. Let me see if I can hear what's going on online. Okay, there's a slight delay between what I'm saying right now and when it's appearing on the screen. Okay, never mind. It's just started working. Thank you very much, Sunshine, for helping me figure that out. And so, anyway, again, today's little live stream is all about some surprising facts about languages. And I wanted to touch on quite a few different things about languages. And so thank you, Sunshine, again for confirming that it's working now. And and I do have I know I'm not using software that would allow me to pull chat messages up on the screen, but I do have my phone open to it so I can see any messages that you guys chat in. And so speaking of surprising facts about languages, I have a little, well, as per usual, a little slide to share with you. Let's see how this works. This would now be my first official um, screen share while live streaming on YouTube. And let's see whether this works out. Um, Hopefully it's set up well enough so that the screen share works out. And although there's a slight delay, I think I'm seeing it come up. Okay, fantastic. So this is a little more stupid generated world map with some random things about languages. And I just wanted to use this as well as my little notes here that I have to make sure I don't forget to say anything, of course. And we've got so the first surprising fact about languages I wanted to talk about is concerns language diversity, linguistic diversity in different places, and the numbers, the raw numbers of languages out there and all that. And so the number of languages out there is a lot more than most people would probably even figure. Um, about 7,000 languages in the world. And so that's a lot more than there are countries, for instance, right? Which means that we got the average number of languages spoken per country is not just one, right? This is many multiple. And the sad thing about this is that although there's about 7,000 languages in the world, about at least 40% of them, maybe a little closer to half, are endangered and sort of expected to most likely disappear by the end of the century. And so within the next century, but yeah, right around the end of the century. And that's really, yeah, really sad because it seems like languages are not being created anywhere near as fast as they're being erased. And that to me is really sad because every time a language variety disappears, so does the cultural memory that goes along with it. And so that's always a shame because cultures can't really survive quite as well when their languages get wiped out and all that. And it's kind of funny because speaking about linguistic diversity and how many languages there are in each country, you know that the US is not really known for having a lot of languages here, which is interesting because we have such a population of immigrants who brought a lot of languages here. But sadly, the average number of American of languages spoken per American per capita is just barely over one. We're largely a monolingual country with about 80 percent of people speaking only one language. Usually that language is English, although there are certain number of people who only speak Spanish. And so that's the norm in the US is just one language, which is sort of sad because that's far less than in pretty much any other developed country. In most developed countries, the average number of languages spoken per person is between two and three. And so that means America is lagging quite far behind. If we were making any effort towards linguistic diversity, and it also goes to, like I said, a lot of the languages, almost half of languages out there are endangered. A lot of those include indigenous languages in the United States and Canada and elsewhere in the world, but the ones I'm most familiar with are in North America. And so it's sad that, well, in the US, we're speaking so few languages per person. There are also many languages sort of dying out over time. That's really upsetting. And um, And good comment, Sunshine, saying that she wishes that they had taught us a second language earlier in school. And that's a good point because fact is, we have, well, according to Noam Chomsky, among others, well, according to many linguists, there are certain critical phases in language learning. Like, for instance, if you start learning a language at the age of 12 or older, you will probably never get as good at that language as a native speaker is. That's just one of the critical phases. And yeah, in the US, a lot of times we don't start learning a language until at least seventh grade. So we're already at least 12 or into the teens by the time we do that. And I do think that would help if we would start teaching second languages in elementary school, maybe. That might be a very good idea. So good comment, Sunshine. And also going back to speaking of language diversity and language density, the country that's like I was saying, the US is not very linguistically diverse in the sense that we don't speak a lot of languages per person, and that a good 80% of us speak English only. And so that to me is a sad fact. But on the bright side, we do have in the US the most linguistically diverse city in the whole wide world, right? And that would be New York City, where there's over 800 languages spoken. And that to me is pretty impressive given how few languages each American speaks on the average. That makes it to me all the more impressive that in New York City there's over 800 languages there, and you know that nearly 40% of households use a language other than English at home. And that doesn't mean that English isn't also spoken in some of these households, but it means, I mean, that's a good chunk. almost 40% of households, or a place where language other than English is spoken in New York City, that's very much out of the normal for American language use, right? And of course, it's because New York City is absolutely chock full of immigrants and an immigrant history, and so languages often come with immigrants, and it's nice to know that so many of them are still alive in New York City. I really do appreciate that. Um, and so it's kind of an irony in a country where we don't speak that many languages per person. We just happen to have the most linguistically diverse city in the whole wide world. And so, speaking of linguistic diversity, we've also got the question of what country is the most linguistically diverse in the world, because we can't not take America to be that, because although we have a couple of cities with a huge number of languages spoken, that's not widely the case throughout all the states. And so the most linguistic diversity in any country is found in Papua New Guinea, which is relatively small country as far as countries go, with a population of about 10 million people. And so even though that's the size of it and not any bigger than that, they speak more than 800 languages, right? Much like New York City, we also have Papua New Guinea where they speak more than 800 languages there. And the number of languages spoken per person is a lot higher than it is in the US on average. And so, yeah, it's the most linguistically diverse country on earth. So I think that's all I had to say about language diversity and scale. So let's move on to the human brain and language part of it. And so, like I got written here, the 150 words per minute, that's the average person speaks about 150 words per minute. Although this number does vary depending on what language you're speaking, you might have a different average number of words, but on average, if we average all the living languages together, 150 words per minute is about the average that people speak. Now, what's interesting about that is that even though uh, it's only 150 minute word per minute average on how we speak it, it's also um, not nearly as fast as we can comprehend them. Like humans, we can process words at up to 400 words per minute and get what they mean and all that. And so that's interesting that we can understand language so much faster coming in than how quickly we spit it out, which I guess does make some sense. And that's good. That's why we can totally understand even people who talk a lot faster than we do. isn't that isn't that interesting? And one thing that's not mentioned anywhere on this slide that does have to do with human brain and language is I brought this up in another video I did, which was debunking myths about learning languages. And the myth I was debunking was that only children can learn languages. Adults are no good at it. And so that only children could learn languages was the myth. And I debunked that by just saying, well, basically, yeah, adults can learn languages too. And it's actually very helpful, very useful for an adult to be learning a language because um, bilingualism or multilingualism can help save off, like delay the onset of dementia by about 5 years, according to a lot of studies. So that to me sounds really good. A little 5 extra years of living before dementia kicks in. That sounds pretty important to me. And I wish it could be more like 10, 15 years, etc. But hey, 5 years is a good start. And so when we're talking about that, the fact is the science goes to you don't necessarily have to be fully fluent in all the languages, right? You don't have to be completely equally balanced bilingual or anything like that. Just the action of going ahead and learning a second language as an adult, especially once you're middle aged or a little over that, um, is important because what you're doing is a bunch of mental gymnastics, trying to differentiate between these two languages and between the sounds and the word order and grammatical structure and all that, and finding prevalence in the one for the other. Um, all that is mental gymnastics. And so learning a second language as an adult can help put off dementia. And so if that's not a good enough motivator for you, then I don't know. I would also say that learning new languages can be kind of fun and kind of really expose you to new cultural things that you hadn't expected before. So that can be a second motivator. But for me, I think that's why I'm going to still keep trying to learn languages and expand my knowledge of language as long as I can to help put off dementia as long as I can. So, because I think that's very much worth it. Hold on, I'm going to mute you so I can uh, cough a little bit. Sorry, excuse me. I hope you didn't hear that. Anyway, um, and so again, human brain and language, to sum it up, language, we can process it, we can take it in a lot faster than we usually spit it out. And also, learning a second language is not just important because it expands your knowledge and helps you reach other cultures. It's also super important for adults if you want to help delay dementia a little bit. And I think that is super important. So let's get all the way down to writing systems and quirks, because we do have very big differences between different languages as far as how we're writing them down and other things. And the first thing I have mentioned there next to what looks like the letter A, capital A there, Rotokas, has 12 letters. That's a phonetic alphabet. So, and the interesting thing about the 12 letters is there are two of those letters that represent the same sound. So that language has only 11 sounds in it, at least only 11 sounds that we capture in writing. And so that's a lot less than well, English, for instance, has a 26 letter alphabet and plenty more sounds than 11 to the phonetic alphabet. And same goes for French and for Spanish. And well, I've already mentioned two languages that use other diacritics in addition to the letters themselves. And so, yeah, so Rotokas, yeah, it is really, yeah, it has the fewest number of sounds for any language, which is why it has the shortest alphabet of them all, with only 12 letters. And by the way, that language is spoken as one of the more than 800 languages spoken in Papua New Guinea. And so to me, that country is looking really linguistically interesting. The more little weird facts I look into about languages, the more that country keeps on coming up. And so also we've got the conversely, we've got the longest alphabet, which is in, well, Khmer. It looks like it says that's also known as Cambodian. And so their alphabet is also a phonetic alphabet, and it has 74 letters to it, which means it has a lot of different sounds in the language. If it needs 74 different letters to be able to represent all the sounds it has, that is pretty impressive. So again, that would be spoken in Cambodia. And one other quirk, I added quirks into writing systems. And the other quirk I was looking at was that you know that in Irish Gaelic, which by the way is one of the many endangered languages that I was talking about earlier, and but they have no word for yes or no. Um, and so that to me is kind of weird. Although I don't speak Irish Gaelic myself, I do imagine they have to have something um, uh, similar. But it's true that in Irish Gaelic and Thai and a few other languages, there are no real direct words for yes or no. Instead, you would repeat the verb um, from the question. So instead of saying yes or no, you end up repeating the verb from the question if you're going to answer it in the affirmative or in the negative. So it's more about that. It's more about repeating what had been spoken to you. And but to me, speaking just a couple languages, all of which really use yes and no, things for yes and no, for me, that's kind of weird. It just seems me as striking. And by the way, the word for yes, that's the one word I know in more languages than any other than any other word. Even languages that I don't know almost any words. There's a couple where I know the word for yes. Um, but anyway, and so moving on to the old and new section, of course. Um, I wanted to talk about what were the oldest languages and what are some of the newer languages. And like I said, it's the same that languages are getting extinct. They're endangered and going extinct a lot faster than we're creating newer ones, which I wonder how long exactly that has been going on for in the history of human civilization. Because we're up to 7,000 languages, I have to imagine that a lot of them were getting created on a regular basis at one point. And these days, it seems like not very many languages have been made within the last 40 years or so. Um, uh, but it's down to just a couple. And so before getting to the new languages, let's talk about the old ones. I have two examples of the oldest languages because they're a little different. And first, before that, I'm going to read another uh, chat. Oh, it's about manuscript being written with a small still unidentified alphabet, not more than 12 characters. I do that does make me wonder whether that was in um Rotokas in that language from Papua New Guinea, because if it was, then yeah, they wouldn't have had any more characters to work on. But but you said unidentified. That's interesting. I wonder, yeah, what else could have so few characters in it? But anyway, getting back to the old languages. Now I have Sumerian there written with 3100 BC. That is because Sumerian is considered the very oldest language, the first written language in the world. So it was first written around 3100 BC or BCE, as we commonly say these days, to make it a little less religious. And so that's well before Latin, for instance. It's a long, long time ago, but much like Latin, Sumerian is now extinct. So we do have examples of it from that long ago in writing, but that particular language variety went extinct. So that's why I also have Tamil down there. And that's because this is the oldest living language, the oldest language today that we still have kids growing up speaking that language as native speakers. And in fact, it's like 2,500 years old or older. So that does put it along with uh, Latin, and it looks like it sorely will it really outlive Latin by millennia at this point. So that's kind of cool. And so it's amazing that that language at that age, it's been spoken for over 2,500 years, and yet there's still more than 80 million native speakers of it, which to me um, says that's pretty impressive, especially when you have certain other languages coming around the world, sort of crossing smaller languages out of the way, making them go extinct. It's pretty impressive that Tamil, after 2.5 millennia or so, still has more than 80 million people speaking the language. And so that brings me to new languages. Like I said, sadly, new languages are not being made anywhere near as fastly as old languages are disappearing. But we do have some newer languages being made, and I don't really want to give a whole lot of credit to constructed languages. Like, for example, I have heard people arguing that the Klingon language, which I think is called Conlang, Conlang, anyway, that is a full language with a full grammatical structure and big vocabulary and all that. But the fact is, I don't really give it that credit, as much credit as being a real language, because there's no native speakers. And unless there are native speakers of this language, we cannot really consider it a living language. And so if this is not a real living language, then I would say it's pretty much uh, well, artificially constructed and not really all that worth your time. No, I'm sure I just pissed off a bunch of Trekkies who would defend it strongly, but I don't really give Klingon much credit at all. And that was one, well, 20th century language construction. And it didn't really happen spontaneously or naturally. And one other problem, besides the lack of native speakers within it, is that a lot of the vocabulary in this language cannot really be used on Earth or in human civilization quite as well, because a lot of the vocabulary is based around a fictional Klingon civilization. So a lot of it is based around a fictional civilization that doesn't exist. And so, yeah, what's the real use of it in real life? So anyway, enough trashing on Klingon. I also wanted to talk about another constructed language that has lasted for nearly 140 years now. So that is pretty impressive. Esperanto. And this thing, Esperanto, was made by, I think he was a Polish eye doctor. Yeah, Polish eye doctor in, I think, 1887. Um, and his goal, as far as I can tell, was to make a language that was not political, like it's not attached to any one country or another necessarily, and a language that would be easy for people to learn, no matter what their native language was. So that's a really nice thought, trying to have a universal language of sorts that everybody could pick up, no matter what your native language is. That's a beautiful thought, but it never really worked out that way. It never turned into the universal language. They still have people speaking it, though, possibly hundreds of thousands of people. The math is really hard to get the exact number on, because there's no census data that actually keeps track of artificially constructed languages like Esperanto. So we cannot know exactly how many speakers there are in the world, but I would guess probably at least 100,000. Some estimates go all the way up to a couple million. Um, But myself, I'm a little doubting of that. And again, Esperanto is a problem because they don't have a lot of native speakers because there are not a lot of communities where the language is really spoken. Although in South Asia and Eastern Asia, I think more than anywhere else. And those are the places where you might be able to find some actual native speakers, some people who spoke Esperanto since birth. But I think part of why it never became the so-called universal language that it was supposed to be, because it was not unbiased in the first place. If you look into Esperanto, it's nice that it has a really phonetic alphabet. So it's going to look in writing a heck of a lot like it sounds. So that's very easy for people to pronounce, or at least for people to read out loud, right? So that's all very nice. But the problem is there's a bias with it because if you look at the vocabulary of Esperanto, it's nearly all comes right from European languages. So this guy who was making it, this Polish eye doctor, way back in 1887, he was really skewing the whole thing towards European languages anyway. So that does not scream universal to me. It screams, okay, yeah, this is what is going to seem normal to white people and to Europeans, but whereas all the consideration for people in other parts of the world, Anyway, that's just my thoughts on Esperanto. But good on him, good on the guy who invented this in 1887. It's pretty amazing that there's still uh, people speaking that language today after nearly 140 years. I doubt the Klingon will end up lasting anywhere near that long, right? So that's good on him. It outlived him and all his grandchildren and all his great grandchildren and so on and so forth. And so that's pretty impressive anyway, even though I've never been a big fan of Esperanto because I don't like the idea of artificially constructed languages. Because they have no real culture to them, no cultural heritage or tradition when you're just making it up out of scratch. But good on that one for still being here. And I don't know, maybe it will be here another century from now. And if it is, kudos. Anyway, and so I also wanted to talk about some newer languages, as in actual real languages that spring up naturally and spontaneously and all that. And for those two languages come to mind. One would be Nicaraguan Nicaraguan Sign Language. And Nicaraguan Sign Language is pretty famous for being a spontaneously generated language, something that happens spontaneously and naturally. And it's pretty amazing because the children really led the way on this one. And so Nicaraguan Sign Language, it was developed in the 1970s and 80s. And when deaf children in Nicaragua, they were creating their own system of signs. So they actually created their own sign language themselves, and it really stuck on, and people are still using it to this day, more than 40 years later after they started it. So that is, to me, pretty impressive. And since that one developed spontaneously and naturally, I do give a lot of faith in that one for it's going to stick around a lot longer than our synthetically or artificially constructed languages do. And so the other language I wanted to give some credit to as a natural language that developed spontaneously and naturally would be light wall light Warlpiri and light light Warlpiri anyway. And that is it also comes from pretty much the 1980s in Australia, though, so not in Nicaragua, but in Australia. And this one, it's a Creole language that came up by mixing together English and Creole and Warlpiri. All these languages came together to give the vocabulary and grammar structure to this little Creole language. And that to me is very cool because this Creole can always develop into a fully fledged language and to stick around a long time. And knowing that it's still here over 40 years later, that means that gives it a good chance in my book anyway. And so hopefully it does stick around a lot longer. And that's especially um, impressive if it does in Australia, where English is a majority language, because English is the kind of language that comes around and squishes other languages right out of its way and takes over everything. And so we have that brings me back to when I was talking about linguistic diversity and scale. I talked about the most linguistically diverse city in the world is New York City, and the most linguistically diverse country in the world would be Papua New Guinea. Um, Now, the least linguistically diverse places in the world, two of the three that I could find were both English speaking. One would be Bermuda, right? British territory, Bermuda, and another British territory, St. Helena, or I don't know if some people say St. Helena, but anyway, St. Helena, also British territory. And these are some of the least linguistically diverse places in the world where almost everybody speaks only English, just one language with not even all that many dialects going on about it. So that is, yeah, again, that's I think that might be part of why in the US we're still normally monolingual is because English is the most widely used language here. It might, and the other um, place that is the least linguistically diverse that I could find is Vatican City. Because yes, Vatican City, it's a separate sovereign entity, separate from Italy. I know it is pretty much in the middle of Rome, Italy, but still, it's a separate entity politically. And to me, it's kind of funny that that would be one of the least linguistically diverse places on Earth because normally their day-to-day dealings in the Vatican, they're all doing that in Italian. That's the day-to-day language around there. Um, but to me, it's funny that they're so linguistically not diverse because they're one of the only places on this earth where Latin is going to be still heavily used, even though Latin has been pretty much dead for a long time, right? Latin doesn't really live today because there's no real native speakers of Latin, because instead it has evolved into all of the Romance languages, right? Um, and that's what they're speaking today, Italian, right? Italian is basically is one of the things that Latins became over millennia, and that's the one they're using today. But they are also, I have to wonder if, when they did the conclave this year to elect Pope Leo, the new Pope, I wonder if they did a lot of that voting in Latin. To me, that does make a little sense, and especially Latin would be a good common language that all the cardinals could share because the different cardinals in the Vatican is, from what I can tell, come from different places around the world, just like popes come from different places around the world, right? And this new pope, Pope Leo, is the first and only ever American pope. So it does make me wonder if having a guy from Chicago at the wheel is going to change anything about culture in the Vatican. We'll see. We'll see. But anyway, so wow, I didn't know I was going to be going on for that long about all of this. It's already been over 40 minutes, I guess. And Well, I'm not done yet. I still haven't covered anything out of the oddities and extremities portion that I wanted to do. And so the first note about Mandarin, so Mandarin Chinese is tonal. So the point of that, there is a word which, although Mandarin a is a has a set of characters that are not phonetic, so it can't really be called a regular alphabet. They do sometimes use an alphabet based on the same one that we use in Western languages, 26 character alphabet. And if you're spelling this word in that alphabet with the set of words of that alphabet, it would be M-A. So ma, right? But that word, M-A, that can mean mother or horse or scold or hemp, all depending on what tone you have when you speak that word, what tone you're using. So four different possible meanings out of one word in different tones, which tone is not exactly the same as pitch for language, but if you don't know tone languages, thinking about pitch is one way to start wrapping your head around it. And yeah, so that's I'm not picking on Mandarin specifically. I just wanted to point out that it's interesting that there are many tonal languages out there. And if you speak only English or you speak only one of the Romance languages or any of those, any Western European language, you might be surprised to know that tonal languages exist, and very surprised um, that even you might be able to learn them, right? And so to me, that's funny that you have some words in Mandarin that will mean very different things and therefore really become very different words depending on what tone you're using when you pronounce them. So that's that. And then that word there, right under the Mandarin thing, that word there, starting with pneumano or pneumono, um, that's all one word. Both lines in that are one word. It's a lot of letters to it, and I'm not even going to try to pretend I can't pronounce this. It's a kind of lung disease. I believe, it's a specific kind of lung disease that you only get if you inhaled volcanic ash or dust from volcanic ash or something. It's very, very specific. And so that's the longest word in English. Although there are other languages like German and Finnish that are famous for really long words, for monster words. And um, there are languages that have words even longer than this one there. So, but I did want to just pick it up to be the longest one in English. And before I have one little other stream tidbit that I want to talk about, I'm going to look in the chat and see if there's anything I could mention from there. Um, yeah, James, I agree. That you're lucky, and so am I, to have English as our native language because there's so much material for you. And yeah, English is such a widely used language. Those of us who grew up with English as a native language are really lucky because guess what? More people speak English in this world than any other language. Yeah, with 1.5 billion speakers altogether. Even though we don't have anywhere near that many native speakers to it, but we have so many people learning English that things get easy for us. So anyway, that is very cool. And um, yeah, and Sunshine is correct too, which when she says that Mandarin would be the language to know because so many people speak Mandarin in today's world. And that's true. Mandarin is actually the language with more native speakers than any other language, but English is the one that has the most number of speakers overall. If you put the native and non-native ones all together, So if you are a Mandarin English bilingual, heck, you can communicate with more people than anybody else in the world, probably any other bilingual in the world anyway. But yeah, and yeah, so I guess that's enough of me reading out of the chat. So thank you all for your chats and whatnot. And so the one last extremity I wanted to mention, one last extreme I wanted to mention are I mentioned tonal languages already. Did you know there are also whistled languages? And yeah, whistled. Like I'm not a good whistler, so I might not be so good at picking up any of these languages, but there are whistled languages. There are some communities, like in the Canary Islands and in parts of Turkey, where they use whistled languages. And what's the big benefit of whistling a language is that it can be heard for kilometers away, or even, well, in the US we would say for miles away anyway. But yeah, you can hear it at such a long distance, hear it a little more clearly, and that to me is pretty cool. That's because that's part of the benefit to human language is you don't necessarily have to see somebody to know what the heck they're saying. If you can hear them, you can know or you can understand what they're saying. And so whistled languages really bring a new twist to this in the sense that they can really be heard from so much farther away, and even without a telephone, right? So I want to stop this screen share and here for a minute because there's not really much point to looking at the same graphic any longer. Uh, And but I did want to bring up, since I already did start talking a bit about what languages have the most speakers in the world, I did want to bring up this one. And I'm gonna share this screen. This is from another video I made about the most widely spoken languages in the world. And so these are the five languages with more speakers in them than any other in the world. And these are by however many millions of native speakers that they actually have. So as you can see here, Mandarin has nearly a billion native speakers to it, like more than 900 million native speakers. And that's huge. That's so far above any other language. Like Spanish has nearly half a billion native speakers, but still that's nothing compared to Mandarin. In English, less than 400 million native speakers. It's 300 and something. And the difference is that English has a lot more non-native speakers than Mandarin does. So it ends up being the most total speakers in the world. And I'll show you another chart that has that on it in a little bit. And then Hindi also has a lot of native speakers. And I wouldn't be super surprised if Hindi keeps growing because after all, the population of India keeps growing. And that's how India has overtaken China as the country with the most people in the world. But that does also help English because a lot of people speak English in India as well. Although not quite as many native speakers, but plenty of people speak it over there too. And Arabic is also on the list as one of the top five most widely natively spoken languages in the world. Now, if we go to the total number of speakers, meaning not just the native ones, but everyone who is fluent in it, so this would include all the fluent people. All of a sudden, English has 1.5 billion native speakers. And that's probably because, the number one and five on this list, English and French, are the only two languages that are taught in pretty much every single country in the world. And so that's why both of these languages have quite a few less native speakers than some others on these charts, but they do really hang with all the other ones in the sense of they have so many speakers all together and they're used on so many different continents. So Mandarin, if you add the other fluent speakers to it, they are well over a billion speakers, but not a billion and a half like English, but pretty darn impressive anyway. And then, of course, Hindi is well over half a billion speakers, and same goes for Spanish. But and this is the one reason that again France makes it onto the list for the top five most widely spoken languages. Not if we include only native speakers, but if we include people who learned it as a second language and are fluent, then France is well over 300 million speakers altogether. So that's what makes it that impressive. And if it were not taught in so many schools and so many places around the world, and if it were not for the English and French colonial histories, right, these languages wouldn't be really where they are today anyway. So that's that about the most widely spoken languages. And I did originally kind of want to get back to the um, words of the year that I did in my last video that almost nobody has seen, only a dozen views, I think. Um, but I'm not sure if I really want to get into all of that. But I did kind of want to mention it because um, new vocabulary often tells us, and the most widely used vocabulary anyway, often tells us a lot about the times that we're living in, like a lot about the culture that we're living in and the times that we're living in and all that. And that's why I was thinking that the words of the year slideshow would be a good one to recap because I think it does say a lot about exactly what kind of times we're living in the 2020s. So do I want to? Yeah, sure, why not? Let's share that screen as well. And so 6, 7, this word, the only thing I find funny about it is that it doesn't mean anything. It's Generation Alpha slang, which presumably probably came from a rap song. And it's a song that gets used a lot on background music, on TikTok and whatnot, because they're not as strict about the copyright things as YouTube is, as far as getting copyrighted music as background that's doable on TikTok. But to me, it's kind of funny because it doesn't actually mean anything. It's kabidi, which is it's a kind of word that doesn't mean anything in and of itself. It's just if you use that word, you're identifying as part of a group. So I guess you can't be one of the cool kids unless you say 6, 7, right? Anyway, so that's kind of stupid. But also see the word rage bait, which Oxford English Dictionary adopted as a noun and it also exists as a verb. This is, rage baiting, pissing people off on purpose, posting stuff, trolling people, being like, yeah, a big someone who wants to provoke online. And usually these are content creators who do this to try to draw more traffic to their website or their videos or anything like that. But anyway, that says a lot about the society we live in, that we would rather rage bait each other than have an honest and full discussion about something. It does go to that as well. And where else? Um, Yeah, vibe coding. And to me, I like this one because this is, I think, a total cop out. People acting like they're actually coding computer programs and making them do shit when really they're just having AI do it for them. To me, that's funny that Collins Dictionary picked this one as the most is the biggest, well, most important word of the year for them because this just goes to how over dependent everybody's getting on AI and how it's going to make us dumber. Like it's at least making us lazier, right? And if we stop learning how to do stuff, that's going to make us a little dumber too. Anyway, just wanted to mention that. And that I wanted to bring up before I went right to AI slop. Um, so slop from the Merriam-Webster dictionary referring to AI slop. This is all this garbage that's getting generated online and we're seeing everywhere. It's really low quality and there's always mistakes in it. You can always see things in it that are probably not possibly real, like primates taking selfies, for instance, or cow driving a motorcycle, anything like that. Anyway, and oh yeah, and of course, Donald Trump and during the 2024 campaign, they put out a lot of AI slop about, especially having to do with the Haitians who were supposedly eating the pets in Ohio. That was all the stupid AI slop that came out of that was a little amazing. Sorry again. And again, it just says more about, the times we're living in. And so I also wanted to mention the um, parasocial relationships. Again, people falling in love with their AI, with ChatGPT or something like that, or oddly enough, with an influencer who they don't know online, or a character from a TV show or anything. That to me is very sad. It makes me think we are way too dependent on our computers and really um, try to remember what it's like to interact with actual humans in a real life kind of way, which I think is why we eventually, the last word of the year I want to bring up is cuts grass. That's why that word came out as so important because this is people, we're using this in the sense of to go outside and have a real life experience, have an experience in the real world that's not tied to a screen in any way. And I love that this is a word that was considered by many dictionaries to be the word of the year. I don't know if any of them ever ended up choosing it specifically. I didn't find any who did, at least not in the little research I did. And that to me tells me that people are actually yearning to get unplugged and offline and have some real life experiences again, which I think is a very good step in the right direction. Anyway, so that's just my opinion on that matter. And so that's it, I guess. That's all I had to, well, share with you this evening. And it's been an hour or so. So I think I should really probably call it quits there. But thank you all for coming and watching. And thank you especially to James and Sunshine for doing all the chat. That was all very useful for me to hear. And I know I'm just reading down. I think what I need to do if I want to go live again is I should use StreamYard so I could actually bring some of the chats up on the screen. That would be much more more helpful of me to do, wouldn't it? But anyway, that's for next time. And so I guess thanks again for being here to watch the very first um, live stream ever, aside from all the premieres I did in 2025. I did a lot of premieres. I do a premiere at least once a week, but I'm thinking that for 2026 and maybe some actual streaming where I'm talking to you outright without a pre-recorded video. So maybe I will do this again, but hopefully with better software so I can pull out some of the chats on the screen. That would be super helpful. That would be a better way for me to share them with everybody. So yeah, so thanks again for watching, and I'm gonna get working hard on my very next video, which is gonna be uploaded rather than just streamed live. But I might end up still doing an instant premiere for it. So we'll see about that, and that will be coming on Monday. So yeah, until then, I'll catch you around next time. Bye bye. Have a good night. Bye bye.